This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Gents. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 211 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Heather Wheatley, marketing specialist with Proven Winners, about Hollywood's portrayal of gardening. The plant profile is on autumn daffodils, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on Concord grapes from Christy Page of Greenprints. This episode, we're joined by Heather Wheatley. She is a marketing specialist at Proven Winners. Welcome, Heather.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back on the GardenDC podcast, Heather. So we had you way back at episode 96 talking about women in horticulture. And at that time, your title was Director of Education at Homestead Gardens. So that was about 2.5 years ago. So what's been going on? Obviously, a big career change.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was introduced to Proven Winners at Homestead Gardens, and I had been a big fan. As soon as those plants hit the bench, I thought, wow, they're really doing it right. And so about a year ago, I decided, while I loved my local contribution at Homestead Gardens, if I had a chance to give a national contribution, I would go for it. And it happened that they needed a marketing specialist, someone who knew plants and knew people, and I love both. And so I said, hey, how about me? And they said, hey, how about you? And so I've been happily with them for about 1.5 years now.
Great. Well, It sounds like a match made in heaven. You could tell us a little bit maybe about Proven Winners for people who might not be familiar with it.
Who's not familiar with Proven Winners? It's the it's a tagline, but it's the truth that it's the brand that gardeners trust most. So Proven Winners is a plant brand. We represent somewhere between 5 and 7 partners, I think, of propagators. So they pick the best plant material, and they've virus index. And if you're not sure Proven Winners, but Bubblegum Vista petunias, then you do know Proven Winners, and that's our favorite daughter. So we have some amazing things. We've introduced an incredible line of hydrangeas and really plants that people can count on. But what we also offer is, on top of those plants, we offer a lot of education about how to care for plants and how to, really, really embrace plant communities and, be successful. And our newest line of houseplants, LeafJoy, is one that I'm very excited about because while I'm passionate about all plants, I kind of have an addiction. I shouldn't say addiction. I'll say addiction.
Obsession, maybe?
Obsession, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I get to do a lot of work with the LeafJoy brand, and they are grown by the plant company. And we selected them for representation because they have matching ethos, high quality, clean plants, virus index. So they really fell in nicely with the Proven Winners family of plants. So.
The plant company is based in Virginia, correct?
Right. Just down from they're in the Shenandoah Valley, but just at the lower crest of it. So, gorgeous mountain water feeds these plants, beautiful clean air goes through the greenhouses there. So it's a magical place.
Nice. Well, we'll have to have you back on sometime to talk all about LeafJoy and the plant company. But this episode, we're focused on Hollywood meets plants and gardening. And this came out of a conversation we had at the recent GardenCom conference in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We were talking about our love of movies and TV and series and stuff like that, but how often they get plants wrong. but occasionally right.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That was a good conversation. And I don't know how it came up. I think you and I in 5 minutes, there's a world of conversations that come up. But that one was really, really a great one because we do share those passions. And I think, I'm glad to have plants included in any genre, whether it's books or movies or music. I'm just thrilled by it all. And they don't get it. They don't always get it perfect, but that they include them, that's good for me. That's good for me.
Yeah, I think we want to emphasize more use of plants and gardening
Yes,
as a profession would be lovely.
Please.
Not just the generic. I'm going to say it's usually rheumatoid arthritis commercials or ads that show a gardener. That's like the one ad you consistently see a gardener is when they're talking about medications for rheumatoid arthritis or similar conditions. And then I'm like, that's not the only people gardening, but yes.
That's right. That's right.
It would affect your gardening. So that's probably why they're using that as a stereotype and always in those ads. And I should say at this point, Heather, spoiler alerts ahead, right? Because there are a few plot points we might talk about in a few movies or TV shows that if you haven't watched them, mute or pause at that point because we will be talking about some spoiler alerts. And I think out of our discussion, I was talking about one of my top rated blog posts of all time is about Vias for Vendetta, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And that's probably how we got rolling on that conversation at GardenCom.
Probably right.
And that we both would love to be hired as consultants on a TV series or a movie and say, nope, maybe those plants would not grow together or maybe not fake.
Season. Yeah. Right, exactly. Oh, please, with the hot gluing flowers to shrubs, it kills me.
Yeah, I think the worst example of that, Heather, is Wedding Crashers.
Oh,
yeah. I can't. It just makes me cringe every time because I love that movie. It is hilarious. It takes place, I think, on the eastern shore of Maryland. And right in our backyard in St. Michael's. Beautiful place, beautiful home that's shown. Everything is like picture perfect at this wedding. And then the bride and groom are standing at kind of the arch. And that's when you're like, what is going on here?
I know. I completely deflate at that moment. I really do. I mean, and it's set. So the date of the wedding is July 15th, right? So forget that they've got the weather, dead wrong for the clothes that they're wearing. But the it's tell all with the flowers. Like you could have done better.
And they're just so big and obvious. It could have been a little more discreet. We'll say that. Like it didn't have to be so obvious that they were fake and glued on, especially because the whole, I think, premise of that scene was how well-to-do this family and couple were. And their wedding flower budget, would have been in the, maybe $40,000 range. I'm just going to guess. Not in the glued on, roses or peonies or hydrangeas. And I think it looks like a spring wedding from the way they're dressed, like earlier in the year, not hot July.
Right, for sure.
But they did show off St. Michael's well. I'll give them points for that.
They did. They definitely did. And so that was the other thing that added to my misery at the wedding is you saw the estate. It was well groomed. The lawn was spectacular. That's a very popular thing to have, spreading lawns out there. And so, why didn't they have natural flowers? Why didn't they have gardens, that could have supplied the flowers for that wedding? Or, they obviously have a botanical interest. They're connected to nature. They're right there on the water. I would have thought they would have made the effort to connect all of that. And then, wah, wah.
Well, it is a comedy. It was about wedding crashing. It wasn't centered on plants.
No, but Kathy, the plants were not funny.
No. Unless that was supposed to be a joke. Maybe they're going deeper than we thought, Heather.
Maybe.
We could give them, there might be some like little secret behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I'm going to doubt that. I'm going to say it was a budget thing.
Me too.
I think it was.
Or I think it was a lack of horticultural knowledge. There wasn't a horticulturist on the team that did the set design. It has to
Mm-hmm.
be. No
Yep.
one in their right mind with green blood would let that go.
Or any wedding florist or designer, they're
Right.
going to look at
That's
that
right.
in horror too.
That's right.
So
That's
let's
right.
talk next about a movie I also love, another comedy on the other coast, and I think it's Santa Barbara, California that it takes place in, and it's Complicated,
Right.
with Meryl Streep, and she has the fantasy life, beautiful
Mm-hmm.
house, gorgeous wardrobe, gorgeous kids, and she's having
Mm-hmm.
fun dating, I think, Alec Baldwin and Steve Martin. And
Mm-hmm.
then you see her garden. She has like the fantasy vegetable garden that people just gasp when that scene comes on.
Fantasy is right,
Yeah.
for sure. So the movie is supposed to be set in Santa Barbara, and I know that they filmed it in Hidden Valley, California.
Mm.
And so to have a lush garden like that would take an independent well on her property to have it so perfect. I mean, the level of lushness in that garden was, I mean, full on fantasy. Full on fantasy. I mean, I learned that it came from nothing. Like they had to build that
Oh,
from,
yeah.
leaf and stem, the whole thing. But that, just to even keep it going for the shooting was a task.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like, I'm not going to say I saw wires, but it is definitely like clusters of tomatoes wired onto plants type of scene, but done well. I'm going to say it is the fantasy, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean,
completely unrealistic.
sure. If it's inspiration and aspiration that Nancy Meyers was going for, which she always does in her films, I'm a huge fan of her work, but she definitely put an aspirational garden in there for the very few minutes that you get to spend in that garden in that film. Yeah. The trellises were like divine.
Yes.
And so, of course, after the film, I'm like, where are those trellises? And let me see the trellises from the film. And maybe you couldn't see wire while you're watching the film, but when you close in on those pictures, the stills, they're there. And I can't swear to it. It could have been a shine, but I really think I saw a produce sticker on the tomatoes. And I was like, come on. Like I want it to be a shine, but it really did look like a produce sticker.
Yeah, I think I know the still photo you're talking about, because if you drill really down on there, and maybe if you're watching it on Blu-ray DVD, you guys can pause it and like get down to the nitty-gritty and let us know if you see some stickers on those produce items. But yeah, and everything has a beautiful gloss and like it was just watered that morning, even though the rest of the place looks like, your typical Mediterranean California climate.
Right. So they did do a lot to get vining on the silhouette of the house, which obviously wouldn't happen very easily in Hidden Valley, but for Santa Barbara, to dress it that way, that was accurate. So I was impressed with that part. So.
Yeah. Always immaculately looking. Right. Let's talk a little bit about maybe some movies that are gardening centered. So I'm thinking especially of The Secret Garden would be the first one, of course, that would come to mind for many. So there's been a couple different versions of The Secret Garden. Do you have one that you think did better on the garden side, or that's a favorite of yours?
Well, I hate to say it, but it's one Hollywood didn't touch. So it was the book version. Made me the happiest because of the descriptions. And of course, in the European model of gardening, they're not always, but they try very hard to get plants right. Because it's not background, it's a way of life there. And some other movies that we might talk about, Greenfingers and things like that, they do a pretty great job of getting plant lists right. So in the book, I thought they did a beautiful job in The Secret Garden for sure. Yeah.
And it also is put on as a play. So you'll often see that. And of course, they're going to have to use artificial flowers for the play, probably for decorating the set and probably gluing moss and stuff on. So, they get a huge pass for that. If they can plop some real flowers in every once in a while for the scent, that would be nice.
Oh, that would be nice. That would be nice for sure. But having them there, the effort to have them there. Again, I really have to applaud Hollywood and authors and anyone to definitely include plants in some way. So, and that's a good one. The Secret Garden's lovely.
So let's talk about a more recent movie that centers around gardening, and that's The Beautiful Fantastic. Have you seen that one, Heather?
I have. Of course I have. Yep.
So
that's
that came
a really
out.
Fun one.
Yeah, it's 2016. I watched it during the COVID shutdown, and I
Me
thought,
too.
Yeah, like a lot of us discovered it then. It's just a small, sweet little movie.
Yeah.
And she's kind of like in this little row house in, I think it's London, a suburb of London, maybe.
Yep.
And she's got a curmudgeon neighbor who has a great garden.
Oh, yeah. But is he?
Yeah.
In the end.
We don't want to give away too much.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
You're right.
We don't want to give away too much. But she's next door to it, and she's got an unkempt garden. And she gets a notification that this needs to be cleaned up. You can't just leave it like this. The weeds are going crazy.
Right. And I think in that one, the plants there act as a symbol, a beautiful symbol, the healer between situations. But, when you look into that character's way of living, the house is immaculate. Her library is immaculate. The way she keeps her time and herself, all immaculate, which is, a lot of the way people live. They don't worry about the outside, or they don't worry about the yard. They focus on the things that they have control of because they don't think they can have control of, or that they need control of, the outside. And if they can't get it, then they shy away from it. And so the evolution of this character does such a beautiful job where gardening connects her to her whole self. So I like that. But she goes through it though, doesn't she? And that mess back there.
And she has, a very, I think they're implied that she has OCD and that she has a very immaculate wardrobe and very, as you said, perfect little flat, the way she maintains things, but she's kind of scared of the outside. She doesn't really understand it. And then the neighbor and some other efforts get her out there and get her out to the soil. So the conversion of her garden from overgrown mess to beautiful is a little fast.
Given the amount of ivy she had back there, holy smoke.
Yeah.
And, and not to that too, by the way, they showed those things as invasive, right? It was the thing that the out of control thing was that it was filled with invasives.
Yep.
So if you could do that in 5 scenes, get all the ivy and invasives out. What a world.
She made quick work of that with her friends and her, and then all of a sudden, bink, it's fully planted up and growing. So that was a little bit of Hollywood embellishment there, but you kind of forgive it for the sake of the story.
Right. Well, and I don't know if the new gardener or someone watching this film would think, if that would ruin their expectations if they did try to garden and it took the whole 3 seasons that it would have actually taken to get that from, barren invasive wasteland to that lush garden. Like if it caused anyone any misunderstanding about how something can grow. Hopefully they do what we do and we give Hollywood a pass,
Yeah. And I think her neighbor at some point gives her some garden books or wisdom to learn from.
Right. That's right.
And then I'm hoping that the newbie gardener or whoever's watching, they pick up more on that than the actual process.
Yeah.
And that she had this garden mentor. And that's, I think, the key.
Agreed. Yeah, for sure.
So the next, speaking of garden mentors, is Greenfingers. So in Britain, they don't say green thumb. They say, I have green fingers instead of I have a green thumb. And that takes place at a prison, at the prison's garden, and the redemptive power of gardening amongst the inmates, and that they actually go to Hampton Court Flower Show.
Right, based on a true story, by the
Yeah.
way, I'm sure.
And of course, Helen Mirren is in it. So
she's
even
so
if you
great.
hate gardening, watch it for Helen Mirren.
That's right. She does. She plays Georgina Woodhouse, which is a real person, and she was the one who inspired these prisoners to go through this journey. So it's a good film.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, besides being based on a true story, is that they aren't. It isn't a low security prison like for people who just shoplifted or did some
right.
white collar crime. He was a convicted murderer.
Real ones, yes.
So these are like serious prisoners that are reformed through this, and it's a really inspiring movie. It's kind of in the vein of Brassed Off and Kinky Boots, those series of British films where something comes about and reforms this town or these people or changes their mind. So it's that type of inspirational movie.
It's so nice to see. I mean, I think we talked about plants being either the killer or the healer, and in this case, it definitely was a healer. I mean, the plants were a healer. Now, I will say, although I love that film and not disparaging anything, he was given a packet of seeds.
I'm laughing here too.
Right, yeah. I know. And he throws them on the ground and up come double violets. Well, not an option, not even possible.
Again, a little Hollywood magic. Yeah. We'll put that along with, like, in The Wizard of Oz, The Field of Poppies.
There you go.
That's the same category right there.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah, but just all of a sudden, bink.
Yeah, the catalyst for his realizing he has Greenfingers is insane.
Yeah, I would have liked it better if it was something like they gave him a little succulent during it, or a little...
Right, thing, packet of seeds could have been Johnny Jump Ups or some little viola, which would have made sense. Yeah.
Or,
double
anything
violet.
like that. But I was just thinking that they would have, in a prison, had a little house plant that they gave each person to take care of, as a starter plant. But no.
Man, I love that idea. I hope they really do that.
Yeah. Sometimes, again, lower security ones, I think you are allowed to have some things as part of rehabilitation. So let's talk about being there with Peter Sellers. And so he's Chance, a gardener with a childlike view of the world, and he drops a lot of gardening wisdom, which is interpreted by the other characters as this, like, wow, like he's this guru.
Yeah.
He's talking about his garden, and they're taking it into world matters.
Yeah. I remember, I think this movie came out when I was 10. I think I was 10 years old, something like that. And I remember people talking about it. We lived in Chicago at the time. And I guess the movie was in D.C.
Yep, it's set in D.C.
Yeah. And my family is from Maryland. So I thought, oh, well, we should go see this. And I never did. And then now I think it's on Prime. So I'm going to go back and watch it. So
you're going to cry, Heather. It's so good.
Oh,
it's
good.
So
Okay.
Good.
I'm excited.
He won an Oscar. He got an Oscar nomination for his portrayal. But there's like a couple scenes where he's walking down, I think it's Pennsylvania Avenue. Like, you'll recognize, if you've ever been in Washington, D.C., some of the avenues and things he's on. So that's one of the ones I think Hollywood gets right.
Okay, great. Well, I'm looking forward to that one.
Even though it's satire and it's not really about gardening, he is a gardener.
Well, I mean,
he's a real gardener.
It's Peter Sellers. I don't know how he would sell it any other way. So I'm excited about that one.
That's definitely one to add to your watch list. And I think if you haven't seen it in a couple of decades, watch it again. You're going to be amazed. Like, those out there who haven't seen it, maybe even since it came out, you're going to be like, wow, I missed this part.
Yeah, it's on Prime.
Definitely check that out. And so another more recent movie that kind of centers around plants, I'm going to say kind of, is The Martian. So it takes place on Mars, based on the book. Matt Damon stars, and it's basically just him for most of the movie. And he grows, spoiler alert, everybody. he grows potatoes in Martian soil, kind of.
And they save his life because he has
Right.
no other food. He's run out. He's been abandoned at the base by accident,
Mm-hmm.
not on purpose.
Yeah.
So he has to sustain himself. And then, of course, after the movie, I'm probably sure he didn't want to ever see a potato again.
Oh, I
But,
can't even imagine. I cannot even
but
imagine.
it's interesting because I haven't read the book and only saw the movie,
Yeah.
but I always wondered about why potatoes, and how the author set on that, because to me, potatoes are such a long-term crop. Like I'm
Yeah.
leaving him in for 3 to 6 months, but that would have been something that he had whole in his MREs. I don't know what they call it in NASA, but the meal packets, you would have had something, because where else, either you had a corn seed from your popcorn, there wouldn't have been much else plant material to
Right.
source from.
Right. I wonder,
Mm-hmm.
because, if that tuber dries out, like there would have had to have been some care
Yep.
in getting the potato to, to use as a seed, seed set for other
Mm-hmm.
potatoes.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know.
I thought it's well done. The fertilizer part, maybe not recommended for home gardening.
No, but when on Mars, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to use what you got to use.
That's right. That's
So
right.
no more spoilers on that one.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
A Little Chaos also came out not that long ago. And that's Kate Winslet at the 17th century Versailles, where she's tasked by the king, I think it was him, to create a garden. And she's like way ahead of her time, landscape architect or designer. I love this movie, Heather, because of Alan Rickman as the king.
Oh, yeah.
And I just adore Alan Rickman.
He's so great.
Yeah. But what I liked about it most was her home garden that they show is very intricate, intense,
and
the shells. And she talks about the Fibonacci, I'm saying it wrong, principle. And she talks about some design, and she's teaching that. But the garden she creates for the king, did you see it, Heather? And what did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought so it was a very formal garden, and I thought it was really interesting. And she did do some of the original garden rooms. So I think the king's architect is actually the one that hired her, and he needed something fresh and grand. And so he pulled in some of the masters, and I'm not even sure how she got in the room. Like, I don't know how any woman got in the room at that time, but it's true. And so he wanted drama in the garden, and you can see from her home garden that she had drama to give, but then it needed to be, a grand design. And she brought in those elements on bigger scales in the garden room, which is something that, we still do. We all still aspire to have garden rooms in our garden so that they're destinations in each place. But she used shells the way that she used them at home. She used water the way she used them at home. And I think she was true to her gardening sense, but also elevated her gardening style. And I did love it. I did love it. Practicality, probably not. I mean, there are
No.
not enough years had gone by in that story to have hedges that tall and perfect,
And the fruit trees bearing loads of fruit type of thing.
Right.
Although I'm sure they, went on other parts of the property, I think, and were scavenging, like take the fruit trees from there. And then I think is a slow moving movie. It's not much on the plot, but basically the king only spends like an hour there, and he's like, it's great, and then that's it.
Right.
So it's just for like his overindulgence, kind of.
Yeah.
But they work their tails off for it.
One of the things that I found was really good that I know to be historically accurate is when she goes to, I'm air quoting here, garden center, right? And she trades some of her things, her lavender and some other things, for some of the trees. I think the king's favorite was like a pear tree or something. I don't know. She wanted to trade
pears.
Yeah, her things for things that she wanted for his garden, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I had no idea the sourcing. I thought that was really interesting, and I often think about that too, Heather, like pre-garden catalog time, like pre-Victorian. You don't have your local garden center. I guess you just go to a friend and you trade, or you go into the city, and you're like, oh, well, how do I get that lavender plant? Can somebody get me a cutting? So, that sort of thing.
Right. And I think the king's architect, I think he was Andre Lenotre, and he set up a lot of exchanges, not in the film, but like in real life, exchanges for plant materials. So when ships went out, he would say, oh, the king wants this or that if you get a hold of it. And I think that he helped build up some of those plant exchanges and introductions of new plants for the king.
Yeah, so he probably would have been using Bartram or similar, and then other plant explorers. And then eventually those get bartered or traded with others in the upper classes and probably make their way down to the servant classes eventually. Some of those plants,
Right. And so that, when we were talking about Kate Winslet, I think she charmed the king to get the gig. So, or she got the gig and then she had to charm the king. But it was all this beautiful symbolism about this rose. Is this too much spoiler? But the king's mistress.
There's really not a plot. I don't think we're spoiling it.
Okay, well then, yeah, you're right about that. But the king's mistress is a little bit older, and the gardener is younger, and he has this favorite rose, and she in the court explains to all these men that all natural things age, and holding up this rose and showing how spectacular it is in the moment, but it will fade. And as it fades, the fragrance gets sweeter and the petals get, a little more wrinkled and softer. And I loved that moment in that movie where the rose was age and beauty, and it was used as a learning tool for the court. And it softened the king to her, but then also he took another look at his aging mistress and had gratitude for all the youth that he not had taken from her, but that she had given him. So I loved that. So in that scenario where, killer healer symbol, that rose was definitely a symbol for a big societal issue that was going on. So
and he was like ready to cycle through her.
He sure was.
Discard her, and then that was a nice moment in there.
I thought so too.
So let's talk about another rose in another movie. So I had alluded to my Vias for Vendetta blog post. And I'm obsessed with this movie. I've seen it so many times, Heather. It's insane. So it is not centered about the rose, but one of the things he does underground in his kind of self seclusion is he grows this perfect rose in a subplot, and it's called the Scarlet Carson.
And where does he grow it?
And he kind of grows it underground. in a light system,
in the
kind of.
tunnels.
Yeah, in under glass and in this light system in tunnels. Yep, right. And the variety doesn't exist. In the graphic novel, it's called the Violet Carson. I don't know why they changed the name, but it's Scarlet Carson in the movie. So I, like a lot of people, did a deep dive trying to find or source either of these roses, the Scarlet Carson or Violet Carson. Neither of them exists in real life. It's a deep colored red variety in either case. And unfortunately, the lovely V alliteration is not in the name of Scarlet Carson, like V is for Vendetta, Violet Carson. That made more sense in the graphic novel.
Right.
But I think some people are still obsessed with finding this rose. And any rose breeder out there, if you can get that copyright or name your rose a Scarlet Carson and or Violet Carson or have that series, you're going to sell some roses. You're going to sell a rose to me. I'm telling you that right now.
Right. Well, so I do remember the Violet Carson as a rose, but I'm almost positive that it's kind of a salmon pink color.
Yeah, and in the movie it's like the dark red, and it's a single, like what you would get in a florist rose, a single tall cutting rose. The
big
other
as a softball,
yeah, large. Yep. The other big part of the movie that relates to gardening is that there's a scene inside a private orchid greenhouse where there's a veiled reference to the source of the nitrogen that he uses in the explosives he makes. So just to spoiler alert that a little bit, there are some big explosions in this movie because it is a movie about politics and rebellion, not really about the rose or the sourcing of his nitrogen explosives. But I did think that was interesting because how would you source explosives, make your own? It was kind of hinted at that, and there have been some accidents industrial wise at fertilizer plants. Very sad to say people have lost their lives.
Yeah, they have.
So it is dangerous sometimes to create fertilizer or work with them.
Right. That's true.
True. And so let's talk about another garden that's dear to my heart that's not so pretty, but it's a documentary, and that's Grey Gardens. And the name of the movie is after the location, Grey Gardens. And of course, the gardens are in very disrepair at the time they're making this documentary. They've been recovered today somewhat, so you can go, I guess it's still privately owned. We can go up there and knock on their door. But if you haven't seen the documentary Grey Gardens, I'm just going to say add that to the top of your list.
Yeah. That's a disturbing one.
And it's about, the people and how they were not meant for the life that they were thrown into, and how disarray has come up, and their Kennedy relatives, Jacqueline Bouvier Onassis relatives. So that's why they even had this documentary made about them. But it's a mother and daughter, big Edie and little Edie, and I just adore little Edie, and she's my shero.
Oh, that's so nice.
The gardens have been in disrepair for years, but you can still see the bones and skeleton of what was once a great garden.
Well, isn't that kind of poetic though? Because they were once.
Yep.
The two ladies were once, granddames, and they're, they faded as their garden. So.
And the house.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all deteriorating.
Yeah. This one I've watched.
At the same time.
I think I've seen Grey Gardens, 10 times. And I learn something new every time I watch it from them.
That's the Drew Barrymore one?
So they did do a play from it, a musical, and a movie version. But the original documentary showing them is like 1972, 73. So that's the one and there's a Return to Grey Gardens documentary too, which gives you more behind the scenes of the filmmakers and a little bit of clips that they didn't include in the original. But you can just go back to the original and get it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Another heartbreaker. Thanks, friend.
I don't know. I kind of find little Edie inspiring because despite it all, she has like this incredible spirit, right? She's like,
well, she definitely deserved Hollywood, and she didn't do it.
Yeah. And she definitely, she's a star in her own mind, and good for you, little Edie, that she rose above some circumstances. So you were talking about the plants as healers and symbols, and in this movie, obviously, Grey Gardens is a symbol, and also they can be killers or they can be the plot twist. So, of course, we have to bring up Little Shop of Horrors.
Obviously. Poor Audrey. Audrey too. That's a great film, and that is pretty much centered, like, she's the biggest thing on the stage. So but she's the most demanding. So do you think she's a Venus flytrap, or do you think
it's weird
modeled over that?
Like, is she a giant Venus flytrap? They make her look more anthropomorphic. Her face usually depends on if you see it in a stage version or the music version or the movie one that we're talking about. She's definitely oversized, and she almost looks like a rosebud. Her face, but with fangs.
Right. Instead of turning her long ways, like, the plant itself is turned like from corner to corner of Audrey's mouth. The top and the bottom would be, she would be turned. So I guess to get it to look more like a person and
to talk. And to be scarier.
To talk.
And to be able to swallow people. Spoiler alert. Little Shop of Horrors. I think most of us have seen it by now. I was going to say that she could have been a pitcher plant or other type of carnivorous, and it would have been just as gorgeous. I thought it would have been cool if it was like a tall pitcher plant with that hood, like kind of flapping and talking.
Audrey 3.
Yeah, Audrey 3. She could be Audrey 3, breed a pitcher plant. And the fact that she does sing and talk.
Right.
But, the Feed Me Seymour scene is terrific.
It is.
And
it really is.
It could be more almost symbolism than a killer because she's very demanding of his time. And very demanding because she needs lots of fertilizer.
Right. So for sure, a symbol for plant needs, but not specifically the Venus flytrap. It doesn't need all that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And so there's been lots of killer plants in movies and TV. So I was talking about Killer Tomato series, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which I loved as a kid, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, both versions where it's an alien plant, and even The Thing is supposed to be like a frozen little piece of plant. And then brings us to the streaming series on HBO, The Last of Us, which was based on a great game, The Last of Us. So, and that centers on Cordyceps, which is a plant-like material. So we're going to include it in this episode.
Yeah. So that's something that is in, a lot of that it mutated and killed these people is kind of ironic. Certainly couldn't come from food. It can't come from flour like they suggested. And actually many people use it to boost their immunity and energy, and it's said to help people adapt to stress and things like that. So it can be a beneficial. It's used in Eastern medicine all the time. So I thought that was a funny fungus to pick. The Cordyceps,
and I think it makes it almost scarier because Last of Us is, borderline zombie horror where they get taken over their brains by the Cordyceps fungus.
Right.
Is because it is something that we breathe in or that people actually use all the time. Yeah. And so when people do research, they get obsessed with The Last of Us because it is so well done. So good. And the script is so well done, and you get so attached to the characters that you're like, oh, let me look up these cordyceps. And so there's so much when you go do a Google search, you're going to do a deep dive on cordyceps.
And you're going to see something that says, oh, cordyceps are often harvested for, and then you're going to freak out. It's just your skin's going to peel off.
You're
But
like,
it
ooh,
really,
that
I
isn't
know,
something Hollywood made up. It is true.
that is true.
Yep. I
It is
mean,
true.
the fact that it's taking over people's brains, that, it can evolve. Things evolve. Plants
Sure, as
evolve.
they do.
Yep.
Right. We respond differently to things that were once very beneficial to us, and then then it's not, and that premise of plants in movies is the thing that gets us. We believe it every time. Like, I think you had mentioned The Happening, where the toxic spores come out.
Yep.
Why they only chose the Northeast for this event to happen, I don't know. Like, what karma are we working off? But for spores to be flying out of those trees, or in like Annihilation. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it pairs, there's a new gene called the Hox gene, which has the homeobox gene from humans, which, develops vasculars, and then the Knox gene from meristem. So a plant gene and a human gene have like taken on these humanoid shapes. Like, it's always, when the plant is a killer, it's turned on us. It's some plant that we've benefited from or used, in some cases exploited, and it turns on us.
Yeah. And I think in the case of The Happening that we talked about before recording, that, again, spoiler alert out there, this is the hugest spoiler alert of the show, is that the trees decide that the human population is endangering them, which they are. Which is true. And probably the Northeast is picked because the filmmaker is from Philadelphia, M. Night Shyamalan, and that's, he always films Philadelphia area, New Jersey, that type. And of course, it's where there's dense populations and forests. So when those pollen spores are released, we breathe them in, and then we become suicidal, is the premise.
Right.
So it's eliminating a pest, which is the human race.
Which is true. Plants can do that and do that, but not necessarily to humans. They have receptors when they know that a predatory insect is coming to them, and they actually they have the engineering to keep those pests at bay, or make themselves bitter to the animal or to the pest.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a huge leap.
No, I think it was a good premise, and that they, just like plants will develop more anthocyanins to be, as you said, more bitter, or they'll send more toxins up into leaf, or they'll, switch off much of the chlorophyll creation because they're like, ooh, I'm being eaten right there. So it's not so far-fetched. That makes it even scarier. And that they kind of, it was wind pollinated. That's the part that's the scariest part of the movie to me, is the wind pollination.
Because what control do we have there?
Yeah,
None.
you have zero control unless you wear a mask, a breathing mask all the time. And so it's kind of a metaphor, again, it's symbolic, a metaphor for the environment and a pandemic. Same thing as Last of Us is kind of a metaphor of a pandemic, or a virtual illness that we can't control. And then I was thinking of Star Trek classic episode, This Side of Paradise, where they breathe in pollen on this planet and they get kind of loopy. It affects their behavior, including the stoic Vulcan. And that was always one of my favorite episodes. I used to laugh about that one all the time.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah. It kind of relates to mushrooms. So, like, if you were to take a mushroom or smoke marijuana, so in the Star Trek universe, they're like, well, they couldn't help it taking in this drug, so to speak, because it's in the air, and they breathed it in. So that's how they got their little high contact off of that. So that was a funny one as well. And you had brought up, I think, a couple other, we were talking about The Last of Us being a game, a couple other games that involve plants.
Right. Oh, Plants and Zombies and Minecraft. My son loved those. And I remember people building farms on, I can't remember what the platform was, but you could build farms
Yeah, I had friends that were obsessed with that farm game and were building, and they were like, I have such and such rows of corn, and I was like in my head, well, you've never grown
No, you
anything in
don't.
real
Right.
life,
Right.
but you're stockpiling this farm, so it's pretty
Right.
funny.
And please don't think that you can put, one piece of corn every 8 feet, because you'll starve and die. The spacing on that's a little different than in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
But
I mean, it's
it
not an
does
educational
introduce.
tool, but yeah, exactly. It you have a brush with agriculture.
Mm-hmm. And I
So
think it's really interesting that it's, so compartmentalized because it has to be a game.
right.
But you would buy fertilizer or watering, and you have to go back, just like those little digital pocket pets that people were taking care of.
Tamagotchis.
Yeah, so that introduces a child to taking care of a pet and having to do those things.
Right, right. And that is a really good point, which leads into the children's movies and these video games and things like that, like the Lorax and the Bee Movie, Moana, the Last Rainforest, like introducing plants to children in that way.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, God, I hope not, but it could be the only time they even really know about plants, or the first time they've learned about plants, but at least it plants a seed that, like the Bee Movie, like bees are essential, and
although the pollination of Central Park scene made me cringe.
Yes,
that was horrible.
I know.
Horrible scene. But
hopefully there's some parents with some education that can square that away.
But
make that work.
I love the way, and Disney does a pretty good job. I'm including Beauty and the Beast and that obsession with the rose and his rose garden. But Pocahontas' grandmother Willow, where she goes and talks.
That's a beauty.
That's a beautiful scene. And then now it is a Disney property. It wasn't when it was created. The first movie, Avatar, is now owned by Disney. But that is a whole plant-based, planet. Although our planet is also plant-based, but to a different degree, where the plants are the infrastructure that they live in, as well as what they breathe and what they eat.
Equal. And equal.
And equal.
And equal. And so, like, the first Avatar does that so beautifully, and then the second one starts with the aquatic life and relationship with nature in that way, and then this new one, Fire and Ash, where they find this isn't a spoiler because I read this, so it's already out there, but they go from Pandora to Earth, and they see why we're on their planet trying to get their resources because we've exhausted ours. And and I think there's 5 and 6. I mean, I think there's more Avatar lessons. More Avatar lessons for all of us to learn. So
and I'm glad you mentioned the Last Rainforest. Because that one is, I think, imprinted on a lot of millennials and maybe even Gen Z kids coming up. And I was a little older, obviously, when I saw the Last Rainforest.
Yeah, but I had to sit through it with my daughter, and oh my gosh, she was just heartbroken. And she loved the Lorax. She understood that, that trees can't talk, and if you can speak for the trees, if you advocate for nature, then that's all really good. And she'd known that since she was very, very little. But the Last Rainforest, she was like, Mom, we can't do it, it's too much, we can't handle it. So I'm glad that movie turned out.
That movie is a little devastating, I will say.
It is. It is, for sure.
I mean, it gives it away right there in the title, right there. Tells you right there. So we'll close out with one of my favorite references to gardening of all movies of all time, and it's Coraline. And it's not much of a plant movie other than the parents, who are described as neglectful. I just call them busy parents. The dad writes descriptions for garden catalogs, and the mom is the editor of the garden catalogs. And they're sort of kind of a team, and they've got their faces buried in their computer and their work all day, and she's kind of left to be neglected on her own and to be taken advantage of by this mother type figure that comes into her life. So I'm not going to do any more spoiler alerts for Coraline, but just to say a shout out to garden writers in that movie that I was like, oh, wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. Well, and isn't that a British film?
Yeah, and it's from Neil Gaiman,
Gotcha.
his book and story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely a lesson to be learned in the way that Europeans share plants and talk about life with plants.
Yep.
And
but
also
that's
such a good film.
They're so obsessed with, they could have been obsessed with doing anything, writing a technical journal, doing anything else. And Coraline is very, I can't believe they're working on this and not paying attention to me type of thing. But good for her. And I love that little inclusion.
Yeah.
So any last uses of Hollywood movie magic in plants or gardening that you thought was great or maybe especially deplorable that you want to bring up, Heather?
I would say, and I think that this is going to be a topic this winter, I think, or maybe in the late winter, the movie Practical Magic, I thought was amazing, the way that they used plant material and they talked about plants as ingredients that, not only healers, but also killers. Like, it showed the duality of plants. But I think I just heard that there's going to be a new Practical Magic. So I think we're going to revisit this. So everything that they did wrong, I think they're going to have a chance to do right. They definitely would have done better if they called the two of us. But hopefully they got enough feedback on Practical Magic, the original, that the new one is going to be even better and maybe more accurate. So.
Yeah, I can't wait if that is going to be a sequel. I'm going to be like first in line for. And yeah, I do agree the original got a lot right, but they did get a lot of flack from especially herbalists and others that were like, maybe not so much.
Right.
Yeah.
That is a lot of belladonna, but not enough to knock a guy out.
Yeah.
And if that's were the case, wouldn't we all have a little in the kitchen?
And maybe the dosage might be the trick there. We don't want to be killing anybody with the belladonna.
Definitely not.
And then, so there are so many other ones, Heather, that we didn't get to talk about in this episode, like from arsenic and old lace on to Minority Report, which has a clever use of plants. So maybe we're going to have to do a sequel to this, maybe after Practical Magic 2 comes out and a couple other movies. Then we're going to have to do it.
Let's find some where the plant is the hero.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Who doesn't love Groot? So let's talk about that next time.
I know.
And
shout out to
inspires. Groot. Yeah. Our only one. I mean, before that we had Poison Ivy from Batman.
Yeah.
And that wasn't helpful.
And exactly. She's not exactly a heroine.
No. I mean, her. Well, we'll talk about that one on the next one. So I hope this inspired a lot of people to check out botanical films or films that have, a botanical bend to them.
Yeah.
And if they don't, I hope they notice the botanicals in all movies. I hope.
And also, any TV series streaming on stage that you're watching, look out with a critical eye, but also, a little bit of forgiveness in your heart. That's not what they do as a living. So
that's right. But we do.
Yes.
And we can help.
Exactly. So for listeners who want to talk to you more about maybe LeafJoy and Proven Winners, how can they contact you, Heather?
Well, you can email me anytime at Hwheatley, Wheatley, at provenwinners.com.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. This has been fun.
Thank you. It's always a great time with you, Kathy. Thanks for having me again.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf, and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Autumn daffodil, plant profile. Autumn daffodil, Sternbergia lutea, is also known as fall daffodil, winter daffodil, or yellow autumn crocus. Despite the bright yellow color, it really does look more like a tall crocus than a daffodil. The autumn daffodil is an heirloom pass-along bulb that is experiencing a resurgence of popularity. It is hardy to USDA zones 6 to 9. Autumn daffodil is native to Greece and the eastern Mediterranean. It's also found in southern Europe. It's related to amaryllis and is deer-resistant and vole-proof. When ordered from a bulb catalog, the bulbs will arrive in late summer or early autumn and should be planted right away. After planting the bulbs, they may take a year or two to acclimate, but they should be reliably blooming each fall and increase a bit every year after that. The bulbs prefer well-drained soil and a mostly sunny location. It does best planted in a spot with a southern exposure and a bit of extra mulch in colder climates. The foliage stays up all winter, and the leaves grow to about 10 inches tall. The bulbs can be lifted and divided before the leaves die down in late spring. Autumn daffodil, you can grow that. What's new this week? Well, my oak trees are shedding hundreds of tiny acorns, so it's that time of year again. My hardy mums are starting to bloom, and I finally got a flower on my snail vine after waiting all summer for that. The September 2024 issue of Washington Gardener magazine is out, and that features a cover story on ornamental cotton. There are also stories on planting alliums for beauty, broccoli in spring or fall. Are inoculated seeds safe for my garden? 12 kinds of daffodils. The elm zigzag sawfly is here. The red-bellied woodpecker is our bird column subject. And we have an indoor houseplant column on nerve plants. And speaking of indoor plants, in our garden tips of the day this week, we celebrated Happy National Indoor Plant Week and urged you to check on your houseplants to see if it's time to repot them. Our other garden tips that we shared this week focused on the spotted lanternfly and looking out for overwintering egg sacs on your tree trunks and wooden outbuildings and scraping those off and disposing of those if you do find them. It's also time to harvest your winter squash by cutting it off from the vine, leaving a short stem, rolling it over to let any mud dry off in the sun, and washing with a light bleach solution to kill any bacteria on the skin, and then letting it air dry for storage. And finally, it's now time to sow your cover crops on any bare soil in your vegetable plot or newly created garden beds. Try a mix of oat and field peas. That's my personal favorite cover crop combination. And in local gardening events that you might want to attend, there are a few coming up in early October I wanted to let you know about if you're in the Washington, D.C. region. One is on Saturday, October 5th. That's the Weed Wrangle at Tudor Place in Washington, D.C., and that's part of the annual National Capital Weed Wrangle, an area-wide volunteer-powered effort to protect our natural areas through removal of invasive plant species. You can find out more about that at tudorplace.org. And then on Thursday, October 10th, is a night on the farm at Common Good City Farm in Washington, D.C. It's their annual cocktail party fundraiser that includes notable local businesses, chefs, and bartenders who will each serve a distinctive dish or beverage featuring Common Good Farms produce. Tickets for that are $65 each, and you can find out more on Common Goods City Farms website. And then looking ahead to the weekend of Saturday, October 19th and Sunday, October 20th is Loudon County Fall Farm Tour weekend. That's in Loudon County, Virginia, sharing a diverse array of farms, showcasing the finest products of the region, including honey, mustard, traditional vegetables, garlic, and craft beverages. You can find out more about that at loudonfarms.org/farm tour. Happy gardening!
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Greenprints with Those Concord Grapes, a story by Emma Rose. Living in central Denver has its perks, and one of the gems of our neighborhood is the food bank run by our community center. Throughout the warmer months, local gardeners generously contribute their surplus harvest. It's like a mini farmer's market where folks can take what they need without worrying about the cost. For those facing tough times, it's a true lifeline. Our backyard is a cornucopia of delights. At the beginning of the season, we're all about radishes and lettuce. Then comes peas, chard, and kale. As summer hits its stride, our baskets overflow with cucumbers, crookneck squash, and the inevitable avalanche of zucchinis. I love crafting bouquets of cosmos and sunflowers, adding a touch of floral joy to the food bank's offerings. By August, my husband and I are hauling sacks of beans and tomatoes. But our raspberries? Well, they have a different destiny. They barely make it past the vine, let alone to our kitchen. But it's not just our garden that contributes. Our neighbors let us raid their plum tree, another shares boxes of apples from their abundant orchard each week, and yet another blesses us with grapes from a vine that's been around almost as long as the neighborhood itself. One spring, as we made our first donation of the year, a volunteer thanked us warmly before eyeing us with curiosity. You brought something special last year, those purple berries. Our clients couldn't get enough. Any chance of more? Purple berries. The only thing resembling berries in our garden were the raspberries. I racked my brain until it hit me like a bolt of inspiration. Absolutely, I assured her. We'll bring those purple berries in the fall when they're ripe. For those accustomed to the uniformity and blandness of supermarket fare, the produce we gathered from our neighbors, with their seeds and explosive flavor, was a revelation. Those purple berries, they were none other than Concord grapes. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprints.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.